Hi everybody and welcome to my show. I'm going to talk a little bit today about cancel culture. And this time I'm talking about Andrew culture, Victorian Government style, and how the fact that the Andrews government has now chose to dispense with the Commonwealth Games, and that it kind of gives a new version of what cancel culture looks like. I haven't seen anybody from the right wing talk about this at this moment, so this is new. So enjoy. Now, I've also got a series of clips I've put together in relation to what the right wing, the Sky Media in particular, the Murdoch press are saying in relation to this particular new event. But and also, I've got a compilation of stuff they said prior to all of this when the bid was first accepted and won. It's interesting to have a look at the comparisons that they make about how they were thinking at the time that the bid was offered and won compared to the way they see it right at this particular point in time. So the opportunity is to criticise Dan Andrews whenever you can. And some of them, particularly bold, are rather horrific in the scathing responses they have to Dan Andrews. In fact, I often think, perhaps Bolt could be sued for some of the things that he says about Dan Andrews, but then why would Dan even bother? So this is an interesting development because the question remains as to whether or not the Commonwealth Games really has any value whatsoever. And it seems to me that it's having less and less value as time passes. Now, no one else in Australia, no other state government wishes to take on the Games at all, even though they were offered that opportunity. And I think someone even suggested that it could be spread around Australia, but no one wants to do that because it's too expensive and really it doesn't have the impact that perhaps it once did. And why should it? After all, we have become part of this empire, and we're kind of still celebrating the empire through the Commonwealth Games. And if we want to become a republic, why should we? And we should dispense with, I believe, any notion of any connection with the United Kingdom. They are an imperialistic they're an imperialistic country, and they should be called out for all the things that they have done that have prohibited the growth and the development of people within particular countries in which they captured. So these are. So what I'm going to do now is just show you this video, and you can make up your own mind what you think. I'll probably make some comments as we go through it, but it has an interesting take, I think, because many of us would probably be feeling disappointed, maybe, that the Commonwealth Games are not taking place. I personally don't give a rat's ass, but there'd be many people that do, particularly athletes, because the Commonwealth Games, because it falls between the Olympic Games, it is a precursor to the Olympics in terms of the athletes having an opportunity to compete at a high level, I guess. Even though we mustn't forget that many of these athletes have competitions throughout the year that they can compete against the best anyway. But here we are faced with Dan Andrews making a really tough decision. Even though he said it wasn't too tough, he just had to look at the numbers and realise that it was going to be detrimental to the Victorian population, and particularly, I guess, it would put in the back burner many of the things that they wish to do in relation to their community. Particularly, I think, they're looking at putting some of that money now towards housing, further infrastructure expenses and so on, which makes far more sense to me than a pointless athletic event. So this is what Initially, I'm going to do a bit of a video about what they're saying currently about all of this. So Susan Lee's on there and a few other people. And they're talking about it in a very negative way, as if they supported the Commonwealth Games. But any opportunity to have a go at Dan Andrews is certainly fair game as far as they're concerned. So clearly that's what they do.
That this will cause to the country. How much reputational damage has it caused, in your view, not just for Victoria, but for the country as a whole?
Well, that's exactly right. It's reputational damage to Australia. People from overseas who see us as a sport.
I just have to comment that if ever you see Susan Lee in Parliament, she is reputational damage to Australia, period. She is revolting.
Nation. Of course, we all have seen Victoria as a sporting state. Don't distinguish between the state of Victoria and the country as a whole. It's an international embarrassment, pure and simple. It's humiliating.
But also our international standing. I mean, how much damage does this do to Australia when we want to host big sporting events in the future?
Well, it will do damage. Has already, I'm sure. Every time Australia wants to put its hand up for an individual event or a multi-sport event, the question will come, well, what about the guarantees?
You know, when I think about this, I think, well, actually, I don't know whether I agree with you, because the reality is we've got the Women's World Cup coming up. We have the Grand Prix in Victoria. We have Australian Open, which is one of the Grand Slams. We have heaps and heaps of cricket during the summer months. It's not like we're starved of sporting activities, and it's not like other countries are saying, well, God, we will not go back to Australia because they've cancelled the Commonwealth Games, you know. There are always opportunities to be able to promote Australia on the international stage because of all these other events that we do. So I often find this argument kind of hollow, I think.
Have you got the state government behind you, and can we rely on those guarantees from state governments?
What an embarrassment for this country.
Oh,
We've
yes.
got athletes now from England to Jamaica, India to Fiji, New Zealand to Canada, learning that the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne, Australia, that they've been training for, has been cancelled. It's been scrapped by a Premier who cannot tell the truth and apparently cannot add up.
The Games will not proceed in Victoria in 2026.
Okay, so why is this Premier, Daniel Andrews, reneging on a deal just 3 years before the Games are due to begin? Well, it's actually quite simple. 1, he's run out of money. 2, he's hopeless with budgets. And 3, he's a megalomaniac. And by the way, I also think he's a liar, now lying to cover up how incompetent he really is. And I'll show you.
Don't you just love the way Bolt must dive into all the negative thoughts that he has around Dan Andrews? Like, Andrew, don't hold back. Let it be known that you hate this man with a vengeance, and here's your opportunity to dump on him as best as you can.
I'll show you the clown show excuses Premier Daniel Andrews gave today for not just cancelling the Melbourne Games, but actually putting in doubt whether any Commonwealth Games will be held in 2026, given there's now such short notice. Let us start with this.
What's become clear is that the cost of hosting these games in 2026 is not the $2.6 billion which was budgeted and allocated and is sitting, vast majority of which has not been spent.
Okay, let's hang on there. This is the same Premier who actually bid for these games. Now he's saying his estimate of the cost back then turned out to be wrong by a factor of at least 2, more than 2. So how did that happen? How did he get it so wrong? Well, actually, you'll find out that's quite typical of the man. That is Andrew's record with the big projects that he loves. I mean, you look, for instance, at his promise to build a new suburban rail link.
I love this bit because most governments, when they bid for any infrastructure deal, it usually blows out. It's unfortunate, but it does. And here's Bolt using this example where it's gone from 50 billion to 225 billion, I think. And of course, Bolt has to use this opportunity to just put the knife in a little bit further. But I would argue that the issue around infrastructure is slightly different, even though I need to say that there is a correlation between the infrastructure stuff and the games, because we mustn't lose sight of the fact that Dan Andrews has decided to still go ahead with the building of swimming pools and athletic stadiums and so forth in the regions anyway. So he's still giving them what it was that he promised. He's just not giving them the athletes to perform there at the highest possible level. Well, if you consider the Olympic Games the highest possible level, the Commonwealth Games highest possible level. But nevertheless, this is the argument that that my mate Andrew needs to discuss.
For just $50 billion. That's now officially estimated to cost more than double that if it ever gets finished. How on earth then could this Melbourne Games cost what Andrews claims? Because that's the other big thing. $7 billion? Firstly, because Andrews is hopeless with money. And like I said, a megalomaniac as well. You know, Andrews always was very secretive. Today again, he refused to even guess what now cancelling these games is going to cost in compensation for broken contracts.
And there'll be a full accounting of the cost of the break of this contract. That's not settled. It's simply not finished yet.
This socialist left premier, and I warned this would happen, has actually just run out of money. Now, Victoria's debt is about to be more than the debt of New South Wales and Queensland combined. And here's another sign that this is the real reason. You know, Andrews is broke, spent like a drunken sailor.
I think it really interests me here because I think that Bolt is actually providing an argument for Dan Andrews not to go ahead with this. They've reevaluated it for whatever reason. We don't know because we haven't got the details. But at the end of the day, Dan has decided that it's too expensive because the money needs to be spent elsewhere because they are in a lot of debt. No one's going to dispute any of that. And he sees it as excessive and that it's just going to cost him too much. So why can't this man turn around at the end of the day and say, look, it is costing me too much, it's costing us too much, and there's other things we could be doing that would benefit the Victorian public more than contributing to a Commonwealth Games.
For years, it's caught up with him and us. The Commonwealth Games people actually came to Daniel Andrews ages ago and said, look, hey, you know, we know these costs are actually we're worried about this cost, by the way. He hadn't told them he was, really. You could save a lot of money, Premier, just by cutting back on your grand plan. So Andrews might have killed off the Commonwealth Games for 2026, or at least postponed.
The grand plan they're talking about was regionalising the Commonwealth Games.
This certainly trashed our reputation. But Daniel Andrews won't say sorry for any of that, or for smashing the dreams of our athletes or thousands of other athletes around the world.
The economic basket case that is Victoria. Tomorrow the state budget will be brought down and the Premier's already spinning hard that it's all the fault of COVID and now too the RBA. But in an example this morning that just typifies the disrespect Daniel Andrews has for taxpayer dollars is the issue of 2 new competition swimming pools for the upcoming Commonwealth Games. Now, in order to win country votes, Andrews has chosen not to hold the Games in Melbourne where all the facilities are there and already built, but in regional Victoria where he'll spend $2 billion plus.
Now, do you think Dan Andrews was sitting back now and thinking, oh, well, I'm going to lose all those country votes? No, every time there's an election, Dan Andrews seems to sweep in. So he's not necessarily concerned about that. My guess is he's concerned about doing the right thing.
Well, Peter, thanks for the opportunity to talk about yet another very, very bad decision by the Andrews government. It doesn't surprise Victorians to think that such largesse is being thrown around for a pointless spend of money.
Let's save the money in Victoria, host the Games in Melbourne, do what events you can in regional areas, but don't put money into regional areas at the moment. We've got bigger budget priorities. We need schools, we need hospitals, we need ambulances that turn up on time. Is there going to be a rethink?
I love the way there she's parroting exactly what Dan Andrews is now saying are his priorities.
Of how these games are run and funded, or do we scrap them all together, Richard? Commonwealth Games will be held across 4 regional hubs, Geelong, Bendigo, Ballarat and Gippsland. We're told the MCG will host the opening ceremony. The Premier Daniel Andrews says the Games will be a net positive for Victoria. Well, I'm not buying it. The Gold Coast was told that. It certainly wasn't. Victoria's on
Oh, how times change.
track to become the most indebted state in the country off the back of appalling waste and mismanagement by Labor.
Yes, waste and mismanagement. So here they are, the Labor government's choosing not to be wasteful, and these guys are criticising the shit out of them.
In the Commonwealth Games, which will come at a huge price tag, it's only going to make all of that worse.
Price tag.
Victoria's debt's hurtling towards $200 billion. Very tough circumstances down here with the pandemic, but a lot of that debt was long in place before the pandemic. But Chris, today, they reckon they can find money for the Com Games. It cost $700 million the last time they hosted it two or so decades ago. Is this a good spend for Victorians?
Oh, gee, if I was a Victorian taxpayer, I'd be making sure that he dragged the Productivity Commission in and got a real bold case and a sealed tight, a clear case that we can make money out of the Com Games, because seriously, do you really want to go out and spend, and he'll have to borrow the money if he has to do anything like he's talking about, which is get out into the regions. Well, the regions don't have the sporting facilities that Melbourne has, so if he wants to do it in the regions, he's got to sign a lot of checks, and that's a lot of checks from borrowed money. Like, seriously, give us a break. It better be ironclad that Victoria will make money out of it.
That this will cause to the country.
So that's the response. The last bit of all of that was their response when he won the bid. So now they're saying this. So they were saying in all of those responses at the end of that video clip, all the things that Dan Andrews now is saying. It's too expensive. That there are other priorities that he has that he'd like to spend that money on, which is fine. But no one now gives him credit for any of that, because they must choose to have a go at him no matter what. So no one's congratulating him for making this gutsy decision, even though he says he didn't have to think about it for too long, because probably the figures told him the story, and that he is putting his community, the Victorian people, first, and will invest that money in things that will directly benefit them. And does it embarrass Australia? No, it doesn't. No one gives a rat's ass. No one really cares about the Commonwealth Games anyway, and we're fooling ourselves if we believe that they do. So if you'd like to get more of these sorts of comments, and I suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel. It would be great to hear from you also in the comment section below. So thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.